Greetings and welcome to Evolved Sun. I'm Matt Finch, your host, and in this episode we're going to cover the Tao of the Final Days, an adaptation of the Dao De Jing designed to serve those facing apocalyptic times, by Shunyamurti. Shunyamurti is the founder of Sat Yoga, which is an ashram and institute and foundation in Costa Rica. I've been watching his YouTube channel called Sat Yoga for a couple years now, and I really liked this book. There's a lot of metaphors in it, a lot of great wisdom and insight into how to navigate these tribulations that the world is going through right now. In this book, it seems to suggest that the world is coming to an end, and I really don't think that's true. At least I hope it's not true. Perhaps what he means in this book is more like that civilization is going to go through a lot of modifications to get rid of so much corruption and to really make life on Earth healthy and fulfilling and beneficial for all citizens of the world. In this episode, I'm just going to read the introduction. If you like it, I highly recommend this book. And before we get into the introduction, let me read the back of it. It says, "A timeless classic revisioned for this historic moment. The world's most beloved ancient book of wisdom, the Dao De Jing, has been a source of inspiration and insight for thousands of years. But it needed to be adapted to offer relevant guidance now, to help people face the challenges of the unprecedented planetary state of emergency that is underway. The wisdom of the Tao delivered here by Shunyamurti is true to the spirit of Lao Tzu, yet very practical and specific in relation to dealing with injection mandates, lockdowns, and the extreme levels of oppression and social collapse that are occurring globally. But a much bigger picture of the meaning of these events is also provided, unveiling the core of the deepest mysteries of the nature of reality and the trajectory of our collective destiny. Those who follow the Tao will be able to traverse this time of tribulations in a state of grace, become true sages, and earn the right to graduate from the school of life by rising into cosmic consciousness." As you'll see, Shunyamurti has got a huge vocabulary. He's obviously very intelligent, and it's one of the better books that I've read in the past few years. So without further ado, let's get right into it and get into reading the introduction of the Tao of the Final Days. After the introduction, there are about 80 passages, which are called songs. So there's songs 1 through 80, and they mimic the Dao De Jing in the writing style and the phrasing style, and I found it to be very useful in my own life. All right, here we go. The Tao of the Final Days, an adaptation of the Dao De Jing, designed to serve those facing apocalyptic times. Adapted from Lao Tzu's original text by Shunyamurti. This book is dedicated to the Supreme Self and to all those immortal sages who have shown us the way. Introduction. The Dao De Jing, the Book of the Way and its virtue, is a timeless masterpiece of wisdom, but to serve the souls of these last days before the final collapse of planetary civilization, the profound wisdom of Lao Tzu required an update to be properly understood and assimilated by postmodern minds. Only small changes were required to orient the principles of truth to apply to our current situation. Lao Tzu's greatness in channeling the way is that it makes clear even now, thousands of years later, the way to channel Tao anew. It is our responsibility to ferment the old wine and rebottle it for the refreshment of all who are on the hero's journey. Keep in mind as you read that for the ancient sages, the concept of virtue also meant real power. Those who are attuned to the way not only increase their serenity and intelligence, but simultaneously their compassionate goodness and their power to endure, uplift, and creatively affect benevolent change. Our hope is to transmit without flaws the great sage Lao Tzu's deep understanding of the immortal's path and apply those principles to the task of commanding the forces in the matrix, now in play. Although the word Tao can generally be translated as way, in this adaptation it is most often being left in its original Chinese form. This is because this central term also has other significations and implications that cannot all be combined in a single word. Tao refers to the vibrational frequency of the supreme intelligence manifesting as the universe. Tao also refers to the paradoxical strategies and tactics that a sage will apply in particular situations of difficulty. Tao can further refer to the state of consciousness of the illumined sage, including the realization of absolute non-duality, the interconnectedness of every being, every seemingly separate thing, and every event in this holographic simulation. In that sense, Tao is equivalent to the Vedic term for ultimate reality, Brahman, That makes it equally equivalent to the later Mahayana concept of Buddha nature. And of course, Tao can also be considered the will of God. The word Tao derives from the Sanskrit term dharma, the core concept of the ancient yogis of the lost era of Bharata that signifies both the accurate way to act in the world in order to produce the optimal karmic outcome, as well as the attainment of infinite mind. Tao can also signify the power of a sage to employ the mind in supernormal modes, in accord with the supreme will. The Sanskrit term for this power is siddhi, and one who has mastered that level of consciousness is a siddha. To abide in the Tao means to live in the highest level of consciousness, in resonance with the source of universal being. In that sense, the Tao is equivalent to Atman, the yogic term for the real self. This is also known as our true nature, our essence, which is formless and therefore capable of shape-shifting on the phenomenal plane. The Kashmir Shivite sages of India refer to this ultimate real as Chaitanya, and its creative power as Spanda. The understanding of the Tao was elaborated in a unique and original way by Lao Tzu, which was developed further by the contemporary sage Zhang Shi, whose ideas are also incorporated in this adaptation. But we can perceive the same wisdom in the innermost teachings of all the great spiritual traditions of the world. Abraham, Moses, and the early prophets of Israel, especially the Essenes and Enochians, were attuning to the Tao. The Tao was clearly taught by Jesus Christ, although the Church later banned and burned most of the authentic Gospels. The Tao can be recognized in the Holy Quran and many Sufi texts. Numerous sages in recent world history have manifested the Tao. But today, in these dark times of dumbed-down materialistic culture and corrupted religious lineages, the Tao is nearly extinct. But since the Tao is our nature, it cannot really be lost. We have the capacity to attune to the Tao if we are willing to train our minds to sustain perfect stillness, purify our hearts to a state of unconditional love, empathy, courage, nobility, and joy, and surrender our wills and all personal desire to the Supreme Presence. If we attempt to understand the cosmos from the perspective of the ego, using differentiating analytic logic, it will appear infinitely complex and indeterminate. But from the level of the Supreme Intelligence, the universe is absolutely simple and immediate. This is because at the level at which the Tao functions, the world is not other than the One Self. Moreover, at the highest level of consciousness, both space and time are recognized as illusory. The entire implicate order of cosmic evolution is here, now, to those who have the eye of Tao with which to see. This is also famously known by such terms as the Eye of Ra by the ancient Egyptian sages, and the Eye of Shiva by Indian yogis, or simply as the third eye. To attain the Tao, we must open our third eye. To open the third eye, however, we must attune to the Tao. This can seem to be the ultimate catch-22, an impossibility to attain. But if we look deeper, without the burden of ordinary logic, and recognize that the Tao is always already present as our true nature, then we can understand that our third eye is open even now, and we must simply start looking through it, rather than only focusing through the two worldly eyes that see only illusions, projections, impermanent appearances, and cannot perceive that all these are governed by a higher power. Simply attune to the Tao, and you will be guided safely through this time of tribulations. The only caveat is that you must be willing and able to drop your preconceptions, your current belief systems, and your conventional ideas of good and evil. You must understand and palpably feel that death is not the end, that there is nothing to fear, and that all beings die, but only on the physical level. All planets also die. The universe itself undergoes birth and death. Once we recognize that we are at the point of planetary death and even cosmic obliteration, and we have refined our intellects to the realization of eternity, we will feel what a blessing this is for our simulated world of suffering beings. We can also then navigate calmly through the current moment of barely disguised global genocide via bioweaponry and other high-tech means of destruction and enslavement of the human race. But what is of essential importance is that we should not judge this event through the eyes of conventional morality and fall into rage or despair. This is the great trap that we must avoid. By attuning to the Tao, we can then see this whole panorama with the eye of Shiva, the ultimate destroyer of worlds, who acts when those worlds have become evil. This world of cruel and oppressive dictators will come to an end, and soon, by virtue of the Tao. The will of Shiva is absolutely benevolent, and this world will be painlessly sucked into the singularity, an infinitesimal and infinitely dense point of infinite power, intelligence, and awareness. This point of eternal light is equivalent to the theistic concept of the Godhead, or Supreme Self. This point of absolute power can be palpated by the inwardly directed attention at any moment, and is the basis of what yogis call samadhi. To be in sahaja samadhi, the yogic term for perpetual abidance in the supreme reality, is to be attuned to the Tao. Once one accepts that the current episode of seemingly unprecedented malignant murder of all life on our planet is a natural cyclic occurrence, inevitable and necessary, and in accordance with God's will, we can relax our resistance and focus on the higher meaning and implications of this event. First, we can recognize that all that is happening is symptomatic of the terminal illness of nature on planet Earth, and that this was caused by the fall of humanity into demonic depravity, having had our souls captured and usurped by the thought form we call the ego. The ego is a fabricated operating system, not an authentic self. But once the soul manufactured the ego to function as a buffer and an instrument of control, the Frankenstein monster of egocentricity gradually took over both the individual and the collective consciousness. The ego ripped us away from nature, replicating itself in every newborn baby, until the ego parasite became globalized. The ego then replicated itself digitally, eventually producing machines with artificial intelligence, culminating in quantum computers capable of housing the ego more effectively than could be achieved by the human brain. So now, the original monster has created another, even more powerful Terminator version of itself, which has launched its blitzkrieg against an unsuspecting human species no longer needed as its host. Against this inhuman opponent of immense computational power, do humans have a chance? Is there any weapon at our disposal that could overthrow the tyrannical, soulless beast that is taking over our world? Is there any relevance to studying the Tao? Indeed, we are in the ultimate David versus Goliath moment of truth. In fact, there will need to be many Davids because we face many Goliaths. So please keep your spiritual slingshot handy and keep improving your aim. Despite appearances, it is wise to place your bet on the victory of those who wield the Tao. We are in a war, and we must master the principles of 7th generation warfare. We must not gauge our vision of what is happening based on a terrestrial frame of reference. The battlefield is interdimensional. Even though the enemy controls the phenomenal space, the high ground of transcendental consciousness is not accessible to it. There are dark forces in the astral planes as well, which the ancient Gnostics called the archons. But beyond the jurisdiction of the demure lies the realm of the divine powers. We should not forget to factor into our strategic considerations, nor fail to form alliances with, such principalities as the angels and archangels, the devas, Buddhas, and ascended Mahasiddhas. But to claim the high ground, known by such appellations as Nirvana, Akanishta, and Paramdhamma, we must be fully in resonance with the highest godly angels. We must have purified our consciousness to an impeccable degree of perfection. The skill to wield the potencies of the Tao depends on our self-discipline and renunciation of material attachments. Other than a few ultra-religious Christians, very few people today believe in the possibility of what the Book of Revelations refers to as the rapture. Nor would most people be interested in being raptured up into the clouds of unknowing. To them, it would seem indistinguishable from death. But the rapture refers to a state of being that could be called the death of death. It has nothing to do with the disappearance of one's mortal body, but rather the ascension of consciousness to the realm of the Absolute. In that sense, the Tao is the portal to the rapture. The Tao offers freedom beyond capture by the ego. Until we have been raptured, the Vedantic yogis call that state Sat Chit Ananda. We cannot know the implications of being gifted with the grace of freedom of consciousness to know and deploy its total potential. The Tao is our original nature, prior to incarnation in these fragile human bodies. By the virtue of the Tao, we can sustain continuity of consciousness throughout the process of cosmic destruction and a new emission of a cosmic simulation that will be free of evil forces, a kingdom of heaven, a paradise for all who live there. The creation and repopulation of a new world is the way that is destined to gain victory in the current contest between the divine and demonic polarities of the real. The Tao is above all worldly jurisdictions, cannot be subjected to any mandates of a tyrant, nor can the power of the Tao be limited by any decrees of a human legislature. You have the divine birthright of an offspring of God to claim your divine right of kings. Surrender to the Tao alone brings the promise of triumph. It must be a complete triumph over death, illusion, fear, egocentricity, and the energy of consciousness itself. This is no small matter. That is why there are so few authentic sages, but there is no reason you cannot be one of them. We are all created equal as souls, regardless of the anatomy, physical condition, or skin tone of our physical vehicles, and we all have free will. But we must give this task our undistracted attention. To attune to the Tao requires wholehearted dedication, accurate knowledge, and love of truth, goodness, and beauty. To attune to the Tao is both simple and extremely difficult. It is simple because the Tao is your natural state, but it is impossible for the unnatural ego to reach it. You must extract your soul from the ego in order to attune to the Tao. The Tao will then take you to the Supreme One. The recommended way of extracting your soul from ego domination is both to recognize your divine nature and to open your heart in total devotion to God, or Buddha nature, etc. You must keep your attention willfully focused on the inmost self, the unmoving center of consciousness, until the state of silent, still presence becomes natural again. You will soon find that you are empty. In fact, you are emptiness itself, the void, absolute nothingness. No thoughts, especially no I thought or emotions, will remain. There will be no projections. What had been perceived as a world will be recognized as the internal functioning of the One Self, the Supreme Intelligence, which is nothing actual, but infinite potentiality that also dreams into existence the unreal temporal actuality. The mode of consciousness will shift from subject-object duality to non-duality. The illusion of a separate world will be overcome. The dream and the dreamer are one. The Tao thus spontaneously functions in unity with the whole. The joyous laughter of complete understanding and reunification with the Godhead is the grand prize that awaits you when you embody the great Tao and its mighty virtue. Behold the Tao.